What's up guys, Carmine here, back again, once again for another video. This time we'll be going over some updates regarding George R. R. Martin, his recent appearance at a Santa Fe panel, the misinformation around his love or dislike of House of the Dragon, and more. So buckle up because we have a lot to talk about. However, before we get started though, if you haven't noticed, I haven't been uploading any videos for the past week, and if you're wondering why I've been so quiet, I promise it's not because I'm preparing to hibernate until the next Game of Thrones spinoff. It's actually because I've upset some people over at HBO. Shortly after uploading my video on what went wrong with Season 2, HBO hit me with a copyright claim on footage I've been using all season that is clearly fair use and hasn't been an issue until now. Except not long after they claimed that one video, they specifically claimed 5 other ones as well, seemingly at random. I spent the last week fighting those claims and won most of them, except this one specifically. Of course, having your videos claimed doesn't keep you from uploading, but it does kill your motivation and incentive to continue. And I don't know about you, but I'm not working for HBO, nor trying to help them recover from their bad financial decisions. So you can see why I had to take a step back for a bit to ensure that this won't be a problem going forward. But we'll just have to see what happens. If you'd like to support the channel, then consider doing so through Patreon or YouTube memberships. It's only $1 a month. I'll leave a link in the description below, and you'll have access to a lot of our exclusive podcast discussions. If you'd like to support the channel in other ways, then please be sure to leave a like and comment, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. It helps out a lot. But for now, let's get into it. Okay, so what's been going on with George? Well, a couple of days ago, he attended this thing called BuboniCon, which is New Mexico's longest-running sci-fi and fantasy literary arts convention, and during his appearance here, George was very, very candid about his life and where he's at mentally. According to people who were there, this felt very much different than his normal appearances, specifically the one he did a month ago in the UK at Oxford, where a majority of the questions were ones asked before and that he'd answered 100 times. Someone on Reddit who attended the Santa Fe panel gave a very brief summary of the events, and it went viral online. Some people started using it as an opportunity to push the narrative that George did not like House of the Dragon Season 2, which is not really correct, and this is something I've covered in my video here. If you haven't seen it, or if it didn't show up for you, then thank HBO for suppressing that too. But in this video, which I recommend you check out, I highlight how George's silence on the rest of the season is not due to him disliking it, but because George doesn't really write when he's off on vacations or business-related trips, which is kind of what the UK trip was, a mix of both. As for the Redditor who commented on what happened at the Santa Fe panel, I saw quite a number of people saying that they could have been lying, and while that's possible, I am now more inclined to believe it to be true because YouTuber Dragon Demands actually asked Elio Garcia about this post, and Elio backs up George's feelings on the matter. For those of you who don't know, Elio is the original superfan to the series, and he constructed one of the very first fan-made websites for the entire franchise. Elio has also worked with George before, so this is a pretty good confirmation of these posts. Again, this is from someone who attended the Santa Fe panel and is just going by what they remember. So, George says here that House of the Dragon Season 1 was great, but Season 2, he'll write a blog post about it. Of course, you can imagine people took that as he wasn't a big fan of it. To me, it comes off that it's more that he wants to gather his thoughts on it before he comments. Personally, I find it easier to have a coherent opinion on something when I sit down and think about it, rather than speaking on the fly, but that's just me, and that's what I'm assuming here is happening. Now, I'm not saying he didn't like it, but what I am saying is that, as far as we know, George liked the first half, commenting on it several times, which, again, I covered already in this video here. We also see here that he has an issue about House of the Dragon being good or faithful, and whether he's a fool for caring about that stuff. Again, this is something that he has touched on before in previous blog posts about how, in Hollywood, writers think they're doing something profound by trying to make it their own. Nothing new here, but what is new is this section here. Continuing to fight for a faithful TV adaptation and just giving up and letting them do whatever they want while he focuses on the books. This is the real damning moment. Now, of course, George was quite clear that he wasn't a fan of how Blood and Cheese turned out. He said that himself. But I'm also wondering if he's not a fan of the Alice River character change, or even Daemon knowing about the White Walkers. Those are some of the biggest changes that has happened in House of the Dragon since the first half of the season. So, yeah. I specifically want to know his thoughts on that because a lot of YouTubers have tried to defend those terrible decisions, and this is really something I'd love for George to comment on. We'll just have to see. Reddit user goes on to say that they feel as though George should not finish the series if that would make him happy, and honestly, I kind of agree. This is something we discussed on the podcast, which would be out tomorrow, that if George decided to retire and leave the series unfinished, then I'd kind of be okay with that. 10 years ago, I would have been furious, but now I'm just grateful for what we have, grateful for his contributions to the genre, and would rather the guy live out the rest of his life the way he wants than to force himself to continue doing something that gives him such anxiety. But that person goes on to believe that finishing the series might actually make George happy, touching on George's visit to Tolkien's grave and dreaming of leaving behind a legacy just as big. Now, for those of you who don't remember, we actually did talk about George's legacy. By the way, I do apologize if I've spent some of this video pushing older videos, but we really have touched on these topics before. And in that same video, I said that I don't think George gets a spot on the Mount Rushmore of fantasy writers because you don't get a placement for not finishing. Obviously, there are exceptions like with Robert Jordan or Kentaro Miura, who passed away due to illness and were actively working on their books, but George has had 10 years. Look, I love the man, but something happened along the way, and hopefully someday we'll get a definitive answer on what that was. The other thing to wrap this all up is that George is still motivated to add to his story and wants to keep doing that. He loves the series and still has ideas that he wants to touch on in future installments, which honestly is great to hear. I'm glad that we know it's not a slog for him to get through, so that makes me feel a lot better. And to touch back on the show briefly, I think one of the things that really annoys me over the discourse regarding House of the Dragon Season 2 is the lack of nuance. This is something you guys have heard me complain about before, and it's something I'll be complaining about again, because it keeps infecting this fandom. I understand that the ending of the season didn't pan out the way we would have liked, and you'd have to be insane to say that final episode was a good closer to the season. It wasn't, but to sit there and act like everything in Season 2 was bad because of the ending is also ridiculous. You have people like this person here pushing out misinformation by claiming George was politely calling out showrunner Ryan Condal and head writer Sarah Hess for Season 2, and not once in that clip from George's appearance at Oxford does he mention either people. While I'm sure George has issues with the showrunners changing things up, I'd rather hear or read it from him than some random try to push a narrative they desperately wish was true, and until George says otherwise, it's probably for the best to stop claiming it. It's also important to remember that even some change can be good. The perfect example of this is the entire Vaemon scene from Season 1, Episode 8, or all of the character interactions in Season 2, Episode 2. It's okay to call out something that is bad, but also it's okay to appreciate what's good and pointing those out as well. As Stannis would say, a good act does not wash out the bad, nor a bad act wash out the good, and I think that applies here. It's a shame that people thought the majority of the season was boring, even super duper smart people with fancy schmancy degrees over here, but you're not going to gaslight me into thinking it was all a waste of time. It wasn't, and I doubt George thinks so too. Again, he praised a lot of the first half, and something tells me, in his next blog post, when he speaks of Season 2, he still won't think it's a waste of time and be as polite and professional as possible, to which even more people will misconstrue his statements. But of course, we'll have a video on that too, so stay tuned. Also, earlier in this video, I told you of someone else who attended the panel and gave me a more detailed version of the events, and forgive me for this, but I think covering that version would be best served as a discussion-style podcast with both Preston and Trey than a standalone video, because they're both very familiar with George's works as well, and I think the topic is best covered with other superfans offering their own perspective. And believe me when I say, there's a lot more here to cover that you won't find anywhere else, so stay tuned for that, and be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. And in the meantime, we'll keep a lookout for George's blog post on Season 2 and keep you up to date with that as well. But guys, that is it for today. Thank you so much for watching. As always, be sure to leave a like and comment. It helps out a lot. And if you'd like to support the channel, then be sure to check out the links in the description below to both my Patreon or YouTube memberships. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Have a good one.